Hello everyone, I'm Casper. I'm the founder of Testaroli, where we help our clients make sure that they deliver their software fully cooked instead of half-baked. And here on YouTube, we help aspiring manual testers and people of all professions to kickstart their careers into being a test automation engineer, and we help them do that one slice at a time. And today, I'm very happy to welcome you to a new mini-series on locators, which is going to be I think, 3-part series. In which we're going to explore everything that you need to know about locators. We're going to discuss why we need them, what they are in the first place. We're going to learn the most popular types. We're going to learn how to build them, how to utilize them, and we're going to discuss which information you don't really need, because there's also a lot of fluff when it comes to test automation in general, but also when it comes to locators. And so in order not to clutter your mind with stuff like that, we're going to discuss which of these informations you don't really need to constantly remember and like churn in your head, because you can always just look them up when you need it. So in order to see how it all intertwines and how it all works together, let's jump into the first lesson in this series, in which we're going to talk about locators, what they are, why we need them, and what's the big fuss about. So today's lesson is going to be about locators. All right. So when you think about doing test automation, and today we're going to discuss the testing of the graphical part of the application, which I also think is like a better and more beginner-friendly way to get into test automation. I also think that it's a more fulfilling career as a whole, but that's for a separate discussion. We're going to tackle that topic on another occasion, because that's a separate video on its own, whether to go for test automation in like back-end testing, API testing, or whether to do it from the front-end perspective. But today we're going to focus on GUI automation, and so when you talk about this, I would say that you'd be hard-pressed to find a more central point than locators. So if you want to get a 5-second answer, what locators are, they are a way to uniquely identify an element or a group of elements on a website in order to allow for the interaction between you or the machine, because you are represented in that situation as a framework on the machine, and the actual end application. So that's like a 20-second answer, but of course there's going to be way more than that. And so let's dive deeper into that subject. In order to understand why we need them, I think it would be good to first of all understand how you test a website, application, whatever it is that you're testing that has a graphical front. How do you do that as a tester, as a manual tester? How do you tackle that problem? All right. So when you think of testing something, when you are assigned a ticket, for example, the usual stuff that you see is, let's say this is the Jira ticket. So let's have a nice Jira here. Let's say that this is the application that you're testing. So this is some app. And so when you get a ticket, hopefully you're getting it in a standardized format. So you don't need to scratch your head over what's exactly happening. This also applies to like doing regression and stuff like that, of course. So you may also get a test case just that you need to go through, or like we're discussing here, a Jira ticket that you need to reproduce, or maybe one that you submit yourself. But anyway, the central point stays the same, which is you get a ticket in which you have 3 most important information. So you already know that as a tester, as a QA engineer, you already know the stuff that needs to be included within the ticket at minimum. So of course, first of all, you need to have a description. Second, you need the steps to reproduce. And then you need the actual versus the expected result. So that's the standardized format which you come across, I think, every day. So hopefully that's something you come across every day, because sometimes you may come across something that's pretty far from that, but oh boy, that's for a separate discussion also. So when you see stuff like that, you know that you just need to go through some kind of an algorithm of sorts to actually have the problem or the test case, in case of a regression, present itself to you. So when you read the description, you start to get a hunch for what's the problem. Then you go one by one through the steps to reproduce, which usually go like log into the application, go to this or that page, scroll down, click something, interact with it in some way. And then you have the actual, so what's happening now versus the expected, so what should be happening now. And so that's basically it. Then you have done the stuff. So the problem when doing automation is that this step you need to somehow convey to the machine, because you are no longer going to do that by hand. You are not going to eyeball it. So when you imagine that you have this application, so let's create something that more resembles an application. Let's say that's some table of contents. You have some articles here. Each of them has an icon. You have another table and another table. There's a lot of contents. Some you can interact with, others you can't. Let's say there's also a footer at the end of the page. So we have a lot of stuff going on. And when you see the steps to reproduce, you just go through it one by one. So you know that, okay, if it says go to that page, I just go to that page. If it says scroll down, I scroll down. If it says click this, I click it, and stuff like that. The problem is when you need to somehow convey that to the machine, you can't really yet, with the advent of AI technology, but you can't yet tell it to just do this stuff in plain English. And in order to tell it what it needs to do, you need to have a way to tell it to perform these steps in a standardized way. So you can think of it as a specific syntax or a specific language that you need to communicate with the machine in order to perform the tasks that would usually be done by a human. And so this is something actually that the framework takes care of. So maybe even let's use a different color for that, because that's really important. So that's what the framework does. And a framework is a very important thing. I would say the most important as far as technical knowledge is included. I really recommend going back to the video on how to choose the best programming language to learn to become a test automation engineer, because I talk at length about frameworks there also. But so the framework is your toolbar to actually have it. So it provides you some high-level abstractions of stuff like interacting with objects, scrolling the page and stuff like that. If you didn't have the framework, you would have to actually code it on your own, and that would be a whole other ball game. So thankfully we have frameworks. We have modern frameworks which allow us to take care of a lot of stuff that usually happens within the steps to reproduce part of a description, but still we need to somehow tell it what to use it on. So we still need to, even though we are presented with high-level abstractions of the functions that do the deeds that we need, we still need to somehow channel that into a specific place. So we need to tell it when to scroll down, how much to scroll down. We need it to tell it whether it needs to hover a mouse over something before it clicks it, or how long should it click for if it's important. Should it drag and drop something and stuff like that? So that's all the things that we discuss that we implement within a framework. And there's going to be a separate section on framework where we're going to do a crash course on something, most likely robot framework, to present how it all lays out in this. But today we're going to focus on locators. And where do locators even come at play here? So like we said at the beginning, locators tell you which element to target. So when you have a framework and when you need to interact with an element on the website. So let's say that in our case, we have a very easy step to reproduce. We just need to click this button, and that's all we need to do. Let's say this is so simple. So this is just one click, and this is our step to reproduce. Just one step, click this button. So we can't really tell, like we already established, the script to do that in plain English. So we need a framework to do that. We have also talked about that. Okay, so we have some function, we provide some function to click an element, but please observe that at every step of this, we are referring to the button as the element on the page, as the interactable element and stuff like that. But still, to the machine, this is not really something that it understands. You can't really tell it to click the button, even though for a human being, a simple description like click the green button on the home page is well enough. For the machine, it's not. And it's still not going to know which button to click. And in order to know which button to click, in order to know which element to click, in order to know which part of the website it should look at, in order to know which text to read, in order to know which element it should scroll down the website or the application, how far it should scroll down until it sees an element. In order to know all of that, it needs locators. And so locators are a way to tell the machine what exactly is the thing that you're referring to. So you can think of it that the locators are a way of telling the machine the thing that you would normally eyeball, that you would normally like see with your own eyes, and you'd know that you need to interact with that one. So for the framework, for the code, it's not really that simple because you just need to tell it something. And in order to tell it, we need a standardized way. And this standardized way is locators. And you may think, okay, I understand that. It's just something that it's a way of describing an element to the machine. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy. But still, how do I describe it if all I know is the human readable ways of describing it? Like in the steps to reproduce, it just said, click the green button or click the element or read the text and compare it to something like that. It's still all I have is basically human readable terms. So how do I translate it to something that the machine can understand? And that's a very good question. And this brings us to yet another very important concept in the test automation world, which we're also going to discuss in a separate video at length because this is very important, and that's called the DOM. So the DOM stands for the Document Object Model. And yeah, I know it may sound daunting at first. Don't worry, it's really easy, and we're going to dissect it in like 30 seconds in a moment, and we're going to dissect it in like 30 minutes at some other occasion. So don't worry about that. So all the DOM means, or the Domain Object Model means, is that the website that you see in your browser or the application, or it's a little different for application. So let's stick with web apps for now, for simplicity's sake. So the page you see is something that is rendered, and it is rendered from the code. You already know that. So all the websites, they weren't like born in nature. They were actually created by someone, by the development team. There is also some technology stack sitting on the side, and so what it boils down to is that every website or web application that you see has some code under the hood. And the code that it has can actually be represented as a tree-like structure. Really, it's not going to be hard. I know, I understand that it's starting to sound more and more complex. We just need a short primer on that. We're going to have a separate video on the DOM, so don't worry. Let's just think about it. We just have, maybe let's even for simplicity's sake, let's even have that out of the view, and let's create a new website in which we're going to have like a table, for example, with some elements, and let's say 3 buttons, something like that, and 1 link that you can click, for example. So this in code translates to a tree-like structure where you have some root. So that's the root node, something we usually draw at the top of the hierarchy, from which you have different elements going down. So you may have, for example, a div, and let's say another div, and another div. So these are, for example, 3 elements that go from the root. And each of these divs hosts something different. For example, this one, let's say, is the header of the website. And then let's say then this one is the middle section. So the middle section can actually have 2 more divs. It's divs all the way down. For example, from this one, let's just go to the buttons. So we have 1 button, another one, and another one. So these are 3 terminal nodes, the one at the bottom, and this button, let's say, corresponds to this one to this one, and this one to this one. So we're just doing this for presentation, so we don't need to really like actually assign it to the respective elements, but just to understand how it all works. So let's say that the other div actually hosts like an li element, and this one has an a. So this is the link, and this, for example, is the whole row, stuff like that. So basically, you don't need to worry about that. You just need to understand that the whole thing that you are working with can be boiled down to code, and this code can be represented as a tree-like structure. And by tree-like structure, we just mean that each element has some ancestor, and some have also the child elements. So this is basically the tree that is created from this. And we use locators to navigate through that tree. So we have a lot of ways to actually interact with this. So we're going to now discuss the most popular ones. They usually stem from something called Selenium, which is a testing framework also. This may vary a bit from one framework to another, but the general purpose and the general idea stays the same. So let's now understand the main types of locators that we can come across, and why we needed, and then it'll become clear why we needed to draw this weird tree, because you may now think, yeah, okay, so this is a tree, but how does that help me with with actually targeting the elements? So you're going to see that in a second. All right, so let's talk about the main locator types. And so let's start with the big two. So that's the ID and the class. We're going to talk about them a lot in a second. Then we have stuff like the name, the tag, link text, the partial link text, and last but certainly not least, you have the XPath and the CSS selectors. By the way, selector and locator sometimes come interchangeably, so you may hear people talking about one of them when they mean the other. It's you can treat it as the same thing. They are most often referring to the standardized way of allowing you to target a specific element on a website, a web application, a mobile application, what have you. So this is just as another added info. All right. So what do we need to know about these types. So first of all, I would say that very often with these two, you're going to do like 90% of your work in one shape or form or another. So the thing you need to know about them, the main thing, is that this one is unique. And this one can be assigned to multiple items on nodes. So the thing to understand that is that the ID is something that by design should be, in an ideal world, assigned in such a way that there's no conflicts with other elements. So it is unique. So you can think of it as only one element has this ID. And for the class, you can think of a class like a hashtag something on social media. So it is something that can represent a whole group. I can assign my post to hashtag QA, and you can assign your post to hashtag QA, and your friend can assign a video to hashtag QA. And suddenly, when you go to hashtag QA and explore the newest posts, you have all three of them, even though you and I created something in text format, and your friend created something in video format. And still, they are all residing together within the class, so the category, hashtag, what have you, of this specific class. So, and I wouldn't get too married to the idea of the hashtag here, because in CSS selectors, you actually use hashtag for the IDs, which may be a bit problematic when you are used to the categories being hashtags at social media. But we're going to talk about that way more in the actual crash course for CSS selectors. So for now, don't worry about the syntax, don't worry about it. It's just, I'm just throwing trivia around because it may be interesting to you. So this is the thing that you need to know about that. And when you think about how a specific node is represented, so how it is actually in code, and I really, really encourage you to go to a website and see its source code. So you can do that by going to the developer console by clicking F12, or you can do it by seeing the source code. It's Ctrl-U in some browsers. It may be other in your browser, so just check how to do that. I would say that the developer console is the best bet, because you'll also get more familiar with this beast, and you're going to use it every day as a test automation engineer. So the sooner you go through the initial shock, the better. And we're going to have a separate course on using the developer console too, because there's a lot of very, very interesting info in that, which is going to be invaluable to you as a test automation engineer. But for now, let's just focus on the things that we are talking about here. So an ID usually has a form of something like, let's stay to the div that we were talking about before. So you have something like div ID equals something and stuff like that, and the closing bracket. Then you have some content, and you have the closing div. So in this situation, you are targeting the element by the ID. So it is looking for any node within the tree, the DOM hierarchy that we talked about a moment before, that has the ID of something. So when you have a selector, a locator that targets this ID, it is looking for the ID attribute within the tag. If you, on the other hand, are looking for a class, you may have something like div class equals ABC CDE. And now it becomes interesting, because the fact that class is not unique also means that for some elements, they may not only reside in the same class as the other element, but they may actually have multiple classes. And so this is going to be a huge topic in the next lessons in this mini-series, because this is a very important caveat that you need to take into account, not to mention other things like automatically generated classes by the front-end libraries and stuff like that. But in general, you just need to know for now that the class is targeting this. And so if you told your framework, and now don't fret about, oh, I don't know how to tell it to my framework. Why are we talking so high-level concept? We need to talk about these high-level concepts because you need to understand that from the bottom of your heart. You need to be able to understand that when waking up at the middle of the night. So when you understand that, it is going to be that much more easy to actually express that in code. That's why we are not starting by looking at a framework and showing you how to do that in code, because then you would need to understand both the code, how the framework is working, and what the locators are. So now we're talking at a really high level concept. Believe me that when you understand that, the other things are going to become a breeze, because then you know what you're looking for. So when you are telling your framework a locator of type class, it is going to look for a specific class. So if you told it, hey, let's click the element with class ABC, and in the DOL hierarchy, it found a div with class ABC, it would not be really concerned with the CDE part, because it's not looking for CDE, it's looking for ABC. So if it found that class, it knows that it can target that element. And so this is the most important thing for now that you need to know. So ID, very powerful, unique. However, in an ideal world, each element that you need to interact with has something unique to actually distinguish it from the other ones. In actual projects, it's usually not the case. So we're going to have a lot of traversal before us. So yeah, I'm sorry to burst that bubble, and yeah, sadly it's not that easy. But in principle, this is unique and allows you to target a specific element if it has an ID, and this class can be assigned to multiple nodes, and by using a selector or a locator targeting that class, you may actually target each of these elements, because a locator does not need to only result in finding one element. It can actually find a lot of them. If there's like 100 divs with class ABC on the website, you, by sending a locator that targets that specific class, you are going to actually get all of them as the output. Not only the first one or like a random one, you are going to get all of them. And very often that's something that we need, because it's not always that you need to just target one element. But this is also going to be discussed in the further episodes. Name, so that's just the name of the tag that you are going to target. So this is something that very often you may see in stuff like inputs. So you may have something like input name equals, let's say, login and stuff like that. And then in this situation, the name is this part. So you are targeting the name attribute of a tag. This should also, in principle, allow you to identify uniquely an element. Tag is the whole shebang. So when you have something like, let's go to the div again. Div ID equals something. Class, because it can have both an ID and a class, of course. Class is also something and stuff like that. Then, by the tag, it means that it's hitting this. So you can find all tags of a specific type on your website. For example, you can target all divs, you can target all A elements, you can target all tables and stuff like that. This may be important when you need to, for example, catch a whole list, and there's like a lot of UL elements, or LI elements. This may come in handy at very different occasions, but nevertheless, it's very good to know. Then you have link text. So when you have a link, let's say you have something a href, and then you have click inside, for example. Then when you target the link text, you are targeting this thing. And the thing is that you are targeting it perfectly. So if you tell your locator that it needs to target a link text of click exclamation point, it's going to find it. But if you tell it that it needs to just look for click without an exclamation point, or just lick, or just ICK, it's not going to find it. And if you want to target it, then you need the partial link text. So in this situation, we may have a similar HTML code. So ahref. And then let's stick with the click. And since it's partial, you can target, for example, LIC. And then if you have a couple of links on your website or in your application, like click, the other one says lick, and the other one says ick, and the other one says other things. Let's now go into that. It will still shoot at the LIC part because you told it to locate the partial link text of LIC. This is also very important. Very often you're going to look for some substring, not only in links, but also in other elements like texts or something in the header or stuff like that. So if you want to tackle some collection usually, or if you need to only have a specific substring, then you need a partial link text. And last but certainly not least, like I said at the beginning, we have the XPath and you have the CSS selectors. And these are so important that I think it would be good to actually scroll down a bit and talk about them at length. So XPath and CSS selectors. So these two, you can think of them as a thing that encompasses everything that we've talked about so far and more. So as you can think of XPath as not only a syntax, but a whole language within a language, which you may need to utilize in order to do more sophisticated things than we were able with just the locators that we talked about a moment before. Same goes for CSS selector. It is debatable which one is better, which one you should go for. So first of all, maybe let's understand why we even need them. So when we were talking about these, you can see that the number of things you can do with those is pretty limited. So yeah, you can target ID, class, name, tag, stuff like that. But what if these still don't allow you to choose an element that you want? What if you have, for example, a list of LIs and you need to target the fifth link in that collection? What if you need to, for example, find a div with a class name that is something, and you need to browse through the children nodes, we go back to the DOM hierarchy, of that div, and from those children nodes, you want to find another div which has a specific ID, and then you go inside that and you select a fifth child of that node. What happens then? You are at a loss, to be honest. You can try chaining these and doing stuff like that, but still you're going to come across situations, and sooner than later, which you can't really cover with these things. And here comes XPath and CSS selectors, because you can use them to do stuff like that. They are very versatile, they are very powerful, and they allow you to do very sophisticated things. So you can actually do stuff like select a specific child, do some substrings also within, not only within like class names, but also within a separate attribute or within a separate tag name. You may be presented with some, in some projects you are going to be presented with for example, custom tags added to the custom attributes added to the HTML tags in order to allow for easier testing. And in situations like that, you need something to cover that. And you have XPath and you have CSS selectors. So first of all, I'm going to do a very short heuristic approach at showing you how do you know which one you are working with. So usually when you see something like this, so like 2 slashes, asterisk, slash, a, slash, div, square brackets, 4, that is going to be an XPath. We are not going to discuss what each of these elements means today, because this is going to be the next lesson in this series, which is going to be a crash course, an introduction to XPath. But when you see something like that, this is an XPath. When you see something like, for example, hashtag something, then this bracket and dot ID, and then let's say a hashtag something, then you have a CSS selector. So as you can see, these are a bit different. Of course, it's not the same selector that I wrote on one side and the other. I just tried to give you like a stereotypical example of what a selector of one type looks versus what the selector of the other one looks like. So you may use either of them to actually do very important stuff in traversing your DOM hierarchy, in selecting a specific child element, in building a specific filter on your own. And I would not say that any of them is better at that. And one thing that you need to understand is that you need both. So sorry, but there's no getting around that. You need to know both. The bad thing is you need to know both. The good thing is that once you learn one, the other one is just going to be a thing of learning the syntax or looking it up. Also, the good thing is that very often you won't really mix them up within the framework or within the project, and there are reasons for that, but also we're not really going to dive into them right now. But you need to know both, because you are going to come across one or the other. There's going to be situations where one or the other is more applicable. There's going to be situations where the tech stack is so that you are thrown into a project where one of them is already dominant or the only one. You may have situations where you need one or the other. For example, XPath is bi-directional, so you can go down the hierarchy and then, for example, one level up and one level down and up and down. With CSS selectors, you only go down, so you only go to the next element, so it is unidirectional. And XPath, for example, features some additional methods within it. So it has things like contains, which allows you to really tackle the substring problem that we are talking about. When you want to tackle or locate something that has a specific substring within it, you can do substring for the attribute, you can do the substring for the ID, for the class, for whatever. So there are reasons to use one or the other. CSS selectors should, in principle, because of the unidirectionality, be faster, but yeah, it's pretty negligible, to be honest, and it's also, I would say, discussable whether you actually need that boost of performance, which is going to be like 1/10,000th of a second in your test case. So yeah, unless you are dealing with something that is crazily performance needy, you aren't really going to be, I would say, concerned with that. The thing is, in 99% of the situations, this decision is going to be made for you. So sorry to break that bubble, but unless you are creating a testing framework for a given project from the ground up, unless you are the first one, or unless you are creating the automation from ground zero at your organization, you are usually going to be imposed on this choice. So you will usually just find yourself in a situation where you need to adhere to the coding rules, and you won't have much to say, which again isn't something that you need to be concerned about, because that's just how it is, and you need to know both anyway. And so jumping from one to the other is going to be really easy. If you are interested in that whole, you are going to find the need to know both of them situation, I really recommend going back to the previous video that we had on the channel about the choosing of a right programming language to learn, because it also tackles this about programming languages, and the same truths apply here. And so you just need to learn both of them, and you shouldn't really be concerned about that. And it's going to be really easy to jump between one and the other. You may have people with strong opinions in your vicinity saying that one is more important, one is better, and stuff like that. I would say that if you have anything to say, you should go for XPath. It's more daunting at first, but it's more potent with its ability to be bi-directional. Not that you're going to use that very often, but still, once you learn it, I think it's also more readable. Here it looks like it's not, like it is more like these CSS selectors is going to be more familiar to you, but I would warrant a guess that it's not the case when you actually learn them. So I hope that I'll be able to demystify that for you in the respective crash courses. But for now, you shouldn't really be too concerned with that. You will see that both of them are really easy to grasp in this mini-series. So for now, let's only focus on one more thing, which is, all right, so I learned all these things, and now you're telling me there is some magical XPath and CSS selector. I don't understand anything, Casper. What's happening? Why were we talking 15 minutes about these if now you told me that there's some new kid on the block? And that's a very good question. And the answer to that is, you can think of these as the primitive elements, and you can think of these as the ways of chaining it together. So you can think of an XPath and CSS selector as a way to chain together the primitive types of locators that we discussed before, plus more. You can think of that as a superset of everything that we've learned so far. So it's not like we were talking about these things for laughs, and now I'm telling you, actually it doesn't matter because we have better things. It's not like that. These better things are built on the foundation blocks of these locators. And you may find yourself in a situation where within the testing framework, you are going to be using the built-in ways of handling primitive locators, for example, the ID class and stuff like that. For Selenium, that may be like the by class. Don't worry about not knowing it. And in other projects, you may actually use the XPath and CSS selectors even for these easy things. So you may find yourself in a situation where when you're looking for something like an ID, you may still see locators like this. And in the case of CSS, something like this. And similarly for class, you may see a locator like this. And a locator like this class. And so, as you see, we are still using the primitive types of locators that we have already talked about, like ID and class, but now we are using them with the XPath or CSS selector. Why? It depends. It may be because of the need to keep everything all nice and tidy. You may have an organization or a project that wants to have a strict rules for your coding or for your stack and for your testing. And in that situation, they may want to just use consistently XPath or CSS selectors throughout the code. So even when you are targeting ID or class, you then wouldn't be using the built-in method of a framework to actually target these elements, even though it very well may, for ID and a class, not even may, it really does have a way of handling that. Even then, you would very often use the XPath or the CSS selector just for consistency within the framework. And it also allows you to then easily chain it together when you need to go some deeper, like a div, and suddenly we can go deeper within the need to rewrite the whole locator. So if you just use the ID locator built in the framework, and suddenly you need to get for example, some children elements of that specific node within your DOM hierarchy, then you would need to rewrite it as a whole. And that would be a whole nother shebang. So that would actually add a lot of work and a lot of hassle on the side of the testing team. So for those reasons and some others, which we're going to go into later in our series, you are going to be using the XPath and CSS even for simple stuff like that. And not to mention that, like I said, you may use it to have more elaborate things going on, like this one, which actually you don't need to understand that now. I'll just tell you that this will actually look in the whole document for any element that has a child of an A type tag within it, which has some div children, and you're going to target the fourth one of those. And for the CSS selector, that will mean that you are looking for an element with a ID of STH. Then you go to its children and you take the one with a class named ID. Oh, yeah, and I see that I called it ID. So yeah, that may be a bit misleading. Let's call it a class. And then you go to the children again and you find a node which is of tag A, and it has an ID of something. So you can actually go, level by level. You can go to a specific child and stuff like that. We will talk about how to do that, and we're also going to talk about why you probably don't want to in another video, because you don't want to get too fascinated with how complex these locators can become. Because they can become really, really elaborate, and they can. It may feel cool to actually create a spaghetti locator that is like 250 characters long, and you need a 50-inch monitor to actually see it. But as it comes with most coding-related stuff, complexity is not really your goal. Your goal is elegance and to have it succinctly written and to be easy to understand by another human being, not really to flex your muscles and show that you are creating something very, very elaborate. Not to mention that such long locators are usually not stable, and stability and flakiness are things that we're going to cover in way more detail in the next videos, where we're going to have a crash course on XPath and CSS selectors. So for now, just remember that XPath is the thing that is really, really potent. It has many built-in functions. It allows you to go in both directions. It allows you to chain the primitive locator types plus more. And the CSS selector is theoretically faster, though it only supports HTML documents. XPath supports other types. It is theoretically faster because it only goes in one direction. That also makes it a little less potent. And it may be an added bonus that it keeps your tech stack more concise, because you already have CSS for your styling in the document, in the HTML. So you then just add the CSS selectors on top of that. You are not adding another meta language like XPath. So they are both very important. And so this brings us to a conclusion of today's video. And so if you need to remember one thing from this video, I would say that this number one thing is that locators allow you to tell the machine which object to target. That's like number one, end all be all. That's the, lo and behold, the most important thing that you need to understand from that video, that locators allow you to translate the things that would normally be handled by your human brain and you eyeballing the stuff to a standardized way that the machine can interpret, and then without too much hassle find the thing that you are referring to. So as it comes with all things programming related, it's just an interface, in this case a part of an interface that allows you and the machine to communicate, to be sure that you are on the same ground, that you are talking about the same thing. So this is number one, that the locators allow you to tell the machine which object to target. Number two is that ID, which is unique, and class, which isn't, are your best friends. You're going to come across them time and again. They are very important. They are going to be your best friends. Hopefully you're going to utilize them to the most possible extent as you can. Sometimes they can be interchangeably, they can be interchanged, but some other things like a specific testing attribute added to your HTML tags. But we're going to talk about that at great length in the specific videos on XPath and CSS selectors or some other video in the mini-series. But in general, you need to remember that IDs are unique, class isn't, so ID is the ideal scenario or something resembling an ID, like a testing attribute, which allows you to target a specific node in the hierarchy. And this is the third takeaway, that the app or website that you're testing is a tree structure called DOM, Document Object Model. This will come in handy more at later stages. Today you just need to understand that it's like that it's a lot of code, but this code is organized in such a way that it can be represented as one big tree, and you are using locators to pinpoint a specific point in that tree. So a specific node, a leaf in that tree. It may not be the leaf like the terminal node, the lowest node. It may be some node higher up in the hierarchy, but either way, you are going to use locators to target a node in a DOM hierarchy, in a tree structure, which when rendered is the app or the website that you are seeing, that you are interacting with. This is another point of the interface between you and the machine. And last but certainly not the least, XPath and CSS selectors are also your best friends, I would say, like ID and class, but XPath and CSS selectors are, I would say, the most popular, convenient, and powerful. Methods of working with the topic of today's lesson, so locators. And this is the closing note, as we have already discussed before, that XPath and CSS selectors can be thought of as specific meta language, a language within a language, or once again an interface between you and the machine that allows you to chain together the more primitive locator types like the ID and class above, or the specific testing attributes and stuff like that. It allows you to chain it. It allows you to do various stuff like that, like take a substring, and we will see why it's very important in the next videos. They allow you to go through the children, index the children, index the ancestors, and go from one node to another. It allows you to create a specific filter that may be something that you need. And spoiler alert, it is going something that you need, because in real life, it's not all that fine and dandy. You are not always going to be presented with a nice ID, with a nice class that doesn't change and can allow you to actually target what you need. With a testing attribute, you may not have any of those things. And sometimes you may use real mental gymnastics to actually target the stuff that you need to target, and to actually work with a DOM hierarchy in such a way that you, in a stable and predictable manner, can actually filter out the things that you actually need in a way that, like I said, is stable and not really flaky and wobbling around. And XPath and CSS selectors are going to help you with that precisely. You're going to see that in more detail in the next videos within this Locators mini-series, where we're going to explore the syntax, where we're going to explore why this chaining is so important, and how a real-life website actually can interact with you, so that you will see why it all comes together, and why you need to both know the basic primitive types of locators and the languages or meta languages or selectors, however you want to call it, to just remember it. So how it all intertwines, so that it can actually allow you to choose the element when very often there is no straightforward way to select it. And so this has been Locators. I hope that it helped you understand the basic premise behind it, that it helped you see how it all works together, that it allowed you to grasp a high-level concept. Please don't get discouraged if not everything clicked, because it will in the next episodes on this channel from this mini-series. I really encourage you to leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you want to stay up to date with your latest test automation engineer knowledge, and if you want to be helped one slice at a time. I wish you the best of luck. If anything is not really clear, or you have some additional questions, I really encourage you to leave them in the comments below, and I hope to see you here at the next video. So for now, that'll be it. Thank you very much for your attention, and keep on rocking.